Good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you to Change the Equation's March STEM Salon, the building blocks of STEM. I'm Linda Rosen. I'm the CEO of Change the Equation. And we see some new faces and we see some repeat visitors as well. And we're delighted to see both. Let me just describe for those of you who have not yet been to a STEM salon the way we do work these things. We have a very distinguished panel whom I'll introduce to you. They have some really interesting remarks to set the stage, but they are mindful of the fact that this is a time for Q&A. So they will limit their remarks and then we'll open the floor to lots of questions. And that's our general routine. We're very excited to have you join us today to look at the potential and the potential challenges of STEM in early childhood. Just this Monday, the Washington Post reported on a study that showed that knowledge of the number system as early as first grade can predict whether or not students will succeed or struggle in mathematics later on in school. It's clear from this and other research that we need to look seriously at the early years to help children gain critical STEM skills. I must say, in talking to folks about this STEM salon, both leading up to today and even this morning, everyone is excited that we're bringing a very important topic to the fore. But when we look at early childhood education, questions of access and quality remain. What can be achieved and with whom? To what extent does an initial investment pay off in the long term? We'll be looking at these questions and more through the course of this salon. So let me first introduce Sara Watson, the Executive Vice President of America's Promise Alliance and the Director, Ready Nation. These organizations advocate for proven investments in the lives of young children. Next to Sara, we have two Saras today. Next to Sara.
She's an honorary Sara.
Oh, okay. Honorary Sara Jie-Qi Chen is the principal investigator of the Erikson Institute's Early Mathematics Collaborative, which recently won an I3 grant to improve the math professional development of pre-K to 3 grade teachers. I also learned that Jackie, like myself, is a former math teacher. So we really are everywhere. Next to Jackie is Sara Mean, a colleague of mine from the U.S. Department of Education in the Clinton administration, but now principal at Bellwether Education Partners, where she writes and conducts policy analyses of the implications of early childhood education and provides strategic support to clients serving high-need student populations. There's more information on the panelists that can be found at your seats. And with that, I will turn this over to Sara Watson.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be here. About 6 months ago, we met with Linda Rosen to ask for her interest and involvement in getting companies that care about the STEM workforce to realize that they needed to look even earlier than the elementary school grades in order to develop the math and scientists that they would need in the future, and also to help kids grow and develop the skills that they need to be good employees regardless of what they're going to do. And Linda really challenged us to put together the research and the story so that we could make a compelling case. And the result of that is the 4-page brief that you have at your table. We are releasing it today at this event. And it is meant to be a succinct case for companies that care about the STEM workforce to invest in early childhood education, starting in the preschool years, because we think there's a really robust set of research illustrated by the story that came out yesterday. What an amazing coincidence, that children need this kind of early learning environment in order to develop the skills and traits and abilities that they need to be successful in school and in life. We also have several materials in the back, and I want to recognize my colleague Josh McFarland in the back, who's the author of that brief, and so we'd love to talk with you afterwards if you're interested in talking more with us. So the foundation for later achievement really starts in the very earliest months and years of life. This quick graph is from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, which shows the development of basic skills starting in pregnancy. The early brain develops 700 synapses every second, which is the neural pathways that enable children to learn not only cognitive abilities like the 1, 2, 3s and the ABCs, but also the skills that they need to be good employees, good neighbors, good friends, good citizens. They learn how to be patient, how to follow directions, how to persevere, how to solve problems. So you can see by this graph shows you when human brain development is happening. The sensory pathways, vision and hearing, et cetera, start during pregnancy. Probably many of you are familiar with that. But also the language abilities and the higher cognitive functions, the executive functions that make people good adults also start in those earliest years of life. Children can be woefully behind at a very early age. The difference in achievement starts to show up at 9 months of age. Children can be 18 months behind by the time they enter kindergarten, and it's very hard to catch those kids up. You can do it if you invest enough and you spend a lot of money on them, but you can't do it for everybody, and we think it's better to address that achievement gap before kids show up. This next chart just illustrates the achievement gap for math scores, and these are for children entering kindergarten. So this is by the time they're 5 years old, we can see a gap in their math scores based on traditional factors such as race, income, and parents' education. Again, the good news is we can address this. We know how to fix this. A proven strategy to address this achievement gap before kids start to enter kindergarten and already get frustrated is high-quality early education. You may have seen some data about this in the news over the last several weeks after President Obama proposed a dramatic investment in early education as part of his State of the Union address. But research is overwhelming and clear. There are hundreds of studies, not just the few that have been discussed in the media, but hundreds of studies have shown that high-quality early education helps children get on the right path starting in kindergarten and with the effects lasting through adulthood. This is a randomized controlled trial of one particular early childhood investment program that provided children with a high-quality early learning environment starting at 6 weeks and going through age 5. And based on this randomized controlled trial, children had dramatically better results in terms of special education placement, repeating in grades, high school graduation, going to four-year colleges. Other studies have shown impacts on other types of outcomes that we all care about, such as children being less likely to commit a crime, to become pregnant as teenagers, to get a job, to have a bank account. So all of the outcomes that we really care about for our own children as well as for the nation's children can be impacted by high-quality early education. We don't want to oversell this. It's not like it's game over at age 5, but it is very clear that a huge amount of children's development happens by age 5. 85% of the brain's weight is developed by age 5. So it is essential that children have those early learning experiences that will set them on the right path. I wanted to show you, a lot of people may think that 4-year-olds don't really have the capacity to learn math and science. And we want to show you some very quick illustrations of what 4-year-olds can do. This is from a public preschool program in Massachusetts. It's not a hothouse program. It's not some exotic program that can't be replicated. The picture on the left shows a 4-year-old drawing a picture of a heart and a human heart and describing in words, that the teacher has written the words, it's not the 4-year-old, but the child is describing in words what the heart does. The picture on the far Right shows a skeleton, a pretty detailed drawing of a skeleton, and what the different parts of the skeleton are. So it's far beyond, show me your nose, your fingers, etc. And in the middle is a bar chart. This is a basic foundation of science, is collecting evidence, testing hypotheses, etc. And there are many, many examples of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds who are doing these kinds of experiments and building the basic blocks of the scientific knowledge. Now, this isn't rote learning. It's not children sitting at desks filling out little bubble sheets. This is fun for them. This is asking things like, how many people have pink shoes on today? How many people went to the movies last weekend, etc. So it is a way for them to playfully but deliberately learn science. I wanted to spend just a few minutes to give you a quick picture, and then I think Sara Mean is going to address this as well, about the prevalence of early learning across the country. This is a chart from the National Institute of Early Education Research at Rutgers University, which shows the percentage of children in state-funded pre-K and Head Start. So you can see that we're making good progress as a nation in terms of 4-year-olds being enrolled in some kind of high quality program. So in addition to the state pre-K and Head Start, obviously many children are enrolled in private pre-K programs, but they're not all high quality. So we're making good progress there, but we have a much longer way to go in terms of our 3-year-olds getting into good programs that can start them on that path toward learning. And it's also very differentiated in terms of the nation. States vary wildly in terms of the percentage of their children in high-quality early learning programs. This is a snapshot. Not all state-funded pre-K programs are high quality. This report also shows by state how many quality benchmarks each state program meets, but a lot of them are in good quality. And we do know that some states are very far ahead in terms of providing a high-quality learning environment that all of their families can access. In the state actually with the largest percentage of 4-year-olds in a high-quality program is a state you might not guess, which is Oklahoma. And so this, to us, illustrates that this is not a partisan issue. It is not something that is only supported by Democrats or only supported by Republicans. In this legislative session, we've had at least a dozen governors that have introduced expansions of their early childhood program, that half of them are Republicans. The governors of Michigan and Alabama and Tennessee, for example, have introduced very significant expansions of their early learning programs. So what can business leaders do? There's a whole variety of things that business leaders can do. When we started this exploration of how we could convince companies that are interested in STEM to support early learning, we found that the vast majority of them invest in the older years. I mean, to them, elementary school is early, and so we're on a mission to convince them that the early grades, starting at 3 and 4, and then the early primary grades, are an essential time to start children down this path of understanding the importance of science and learning, and also building the social, emotional, executive behavioral skills that children need to be good employees no matter what they do. So there's a variety of things that business leaders can do, from advocating for public investments in high-quality early learning to investing in local pre-K programs. And we have some examples of companies that have already taken these kinds of actions in the brief at your seat. For example, PNC Bank sponsors a planetarium, a portable planetarium. It's like a great big bubble, one of those bouncy things that kids bounce around in, that goes around to different preschools so little kids can see a planetarium show. National Grid, a utility company in Massachusetts, invests in STEM kits that help preschool teachers teach science and math to their children. So there's a variety of things that companies can do. We'd love to partner with any of you who are interested in working with us. In the back, there's a a couple of additional materials, a brief about Ready Nation, our work generally, as well as a terrific Ed Week article by J.D. Chesloff, the director of the Massachusetts Business Roundtable, on early childhood and STEM. He's a great expert on this topic, if any of you want to have additional people to talk to. Josh is also distributing a sign-up list for anybody who's interested in getting more materials from us. We send out messages about once or twice a month with new champions, economic evidence about the importance of investments in early childhood, and again, more about business involvement in early childhood. So again, Linda and Alyssa, thank you so much for organizing this. We're so excited when the invitation came, and we look forward to working with you.
So, and Duncan and his colleagues and look at early reading skills and then the later reading achievement. Of course, no surprise, and the early reading skills contribute the later reading achievement. Similar finding has been reported for math. Early math skills contributed the later math achievement. What is surprising is this. Early math skills also contribute later reading achievement, but not vice versa. So the conclusion from the authors is mathematics has a stronger predictive power than reading for later achievement. This is important because as a teacher, as a parents, as adults, we all feel comfortable to read to our children. Bedtime story is a routine for our children. However, we are not so comfortable to help our kids to grab early foundational mathematics skills. Another study really talk about, this is again Duncan and his colleagues, and it's indicate K-5 students persistently scoring at the bottom of that math distribution were 13% points less likely to graduate from high school and 20% points less likely to attend college. Another one from David Geary. A lack of number system knowledge in first grade is correlated to lower scores on the 7th grade math test used to determine employability and the wage in adults. So, just a few studies indicate early math matters. Then the question is, what is quality early math look like? Okay, and in which way this early math skills really can contribute to later achievement? What I'm going to do is to show you a classroom video, okay? And data analysis. We say, oh God, this is a 3- and 4-year-old. Okay, and what I'm going to show you is Chicago public school, and in the south side is 100% African-American school, and the low income is 98%, okay? This is state pre-K kindergarten classroom, and they are engaging mathematics learning because, and the teacher really participated in my project. And they are engaged here is a data analysis, not just the counting, not just count to 100, not just naming the shapes. It's a data analysis. What happened is that on the day before, the teacher read a book, this called Whose Shoes by Stephen Swinburne. And this book talks about we wear shoes, different kind of shoes. Construction workers have kind of shoes. Ballet dancer has a different kind of shoes. Children have a different kind of shoes. You have winter shoes and summer shoes, all kinds of shoes. Then after that, teacher asked children, what kind of shoes are you wearing today? Okay? We kids come to school, we always have shoes on it. What kind of shoes do we have today? If we want to make a book about shoes, about our shoes, how we are going to categorize our shoes? So that's the question. This question is very authentic or meaningful to these young children because they pick up their shoes. It is winter. They have to think about what kind of shoes. Then kids discuss. Then teacher made this curtain, shower curtain, and it really made a grade. that ask kids to put their shoes in different categories. They really discuss and talk about it, and this kind of ways and that kind of ways, based on the color, based on the function, based on my favorite. That's because that's Superman's shoes, so they want to put that kind of ways. So finally, they decided a category. So they put their shoes there. We call this shoe graph. It is an object graph. It is very concrete for children to understand where their shoes belong to. However, there's a problem, because by the end of the day, kids have to put their shoes on. They left, and then there's no graph. So do they remember where they belong to next day? They may not. So next day, teacher came back. They did a pictorial graph. So what I'm going to show you is a 4-minute videotape about this particular part of the instruction.
If you think of an idea so we can make our graph and keep it.
In my classroom, we made 2 different real shoe graphs, and I decided after those 2 experiences, the children were ready to make a pictograph and move from the more concrete to more abstract.
What am I doing?
Let's get Let's make it up. Writing.
Yeah, I'm doing some writing. What if I drew a picture of my shoe? Right? What if I drew a picture of my shoe? And then we could remember what shoe we were wearing today, and we could make a new graph. Do you think we could do that?
I wanted the students to draw their shoes instead of just giving them a paper cutout, because I think it gives them more meaning to that abstract representation of their shoe. So when we make the physical graph, it's easy for the children to see their shoe on the graph. It's physically there. You know, they're holding it in their hand. It's concrete. When you start to take a step away from that to be more abstract, the meaning can get lost in children that are at this age. So by having them draw their own shoe, it gives them more ownership. I also think that by drawing the shoe, it helps them to remember how they sorted their shoe in the first place, what the attribute was that they were sorting it in. Because when they're drawing it, you know, I ask them, make sure that you draw your straps, you know, make sure that you draw your strings to help them remember that that's how we had decided to sort the information.
Do you see where it says zippers? Okay. Good, zippers.
The reason I wanted the students to help construct the pictograph themselves is that if I'm putting the pictures up on the graph, I'm taking ownership of it. Then it's me sorting the information. If the students are doing it themselves, they're the ones taking ownership of their data, their information. It's their shoe, and if they're the ones putting it on the graph, then it helps them to remember, again, that this picture represents their shoe. It's just another step in helping them to make that connection between the concrete and the abstract.
Can you look with your eyes and find your shoe on the graph?
I know it's my shoe.
Look with your eyes. Look with your eyes.
Mine with the dots
Okay,
on them.
whose shoe was this picture for? Right. What about this one?
Jasmine.
Jasmine. Okay. And what about this one?
Mine.
Yours, Ashley. What about this one?
Me.
That's yours, Darian. And this, whose shoe was this?
That's
one?
yours.
Right. So does everybody have their shoe on our picture graph?
Yes.
Yes, we all do, right? So tomorrow when we come back and look, we can remember that these were our shoes. Which of our categories has the most shoes?
The string.
Right, the strings. How do you know it has the most shoes? Because it's all the way up to the top. Well, let's count and see how many shoes or boots have strings. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Right. So here's my question. If we did this graph on a different day when it was hot outside, what do you think would be different about our graph?
They can wear flip-flops in school.
Right, we might have flip-flops on if it's hot outside. Right. You're right.
We can wear sandals.
We could have a category with sandals. What I want to do is I want to keep our graph here so that we can talk about it a different day
When talking about our data display, I thought it was important to ask questions that will lead the children to think about what's the meaning of this data today and how might it be different another day. That's the reason that I asked the children to think how this graph would be different if it were made on a hot day. And part of that came from the books that we have read yesterday about shoes. The book Whose Shoes was a good lead-in for that question, I think. But getting the children to think about that graphing is a way of organizing information at a specific time and in a specific place. You know, the information that we graph today is going to be different on any other day. And it's important for them to think about that.
Because a teacher can learn as long as we help them. And then we see this real, I'm sorry, I forgot about this. This is a wonderful activity for children. Children engaged. But it's not just fun and engaging. It also really helps children to get a foundational mathematics ideas and concepts. Here's one. The purpose of collecting data is to answer questions when the answers are not immediately obvious. Which categories of shoes do we have the most? It is not obvious. So we have to collect data in order to answer these questions. In the business world, we do data collections all the time. We collect data is not for the sake of collecting data. We collect data, try to answer the questions. Okay, the budget. And I will ask Lisa before we start to say, I said, what kind of a doctor, because she works in the medical field, what kind of a doctor most like to get burned? She said, I don't quite know. We need data because it is not obvious. We need data to help us to answer that question. A collection of data can be sorted in different ways. What are the different ways? What we call attributes. Color is an attribute. We can use color to sort our boots. We can also do the function. We can also do the stripes, strings. Those are all different attributes. Attribute is a very important concept in early mathematics. When we're counting, we don't just counting, we're counting different kind of objects. We need to count the people, we count the chair, that's different attributes. When we talk about the shapes, and the kids, when you do the triangles, you put the different ways, they call it upside down triangle. But upside down triangle is still a triangle because there is three sides and the 3 angles. That's the attribute of a triangle. Okay, so and the collection of data can be sorted in different ways because you focus on different attributes. And how data are gathered and organized depends on the questions. When in a hot summer day, and we might do differently, okay? So, and it is not data-driven questions, but a question drives your data collection. Data must be represented in order to be interpreted. Here, the teacher used bar graphs. That is much easier for children to understand which category has the most, which has the least. Because a bar graph is really mostly kind of measurement related. Or if you want to talk about a relationship, the part-whole relationship, you might want to use the pie chart. Okay, so different ways to represent data can really be mean differently. Lastly, data analysis can help us predict the likelihood of some events, the similar events. Okay, similar events. That's what data analysis helps us to do. So we know by Thanksgiving or by Christmas time, we need to put more stock in the store because there's more people to come to shopping. And I came here to take a taxi, and I talked to a taxi driver, and I asked him, how's the business? He said it's not very good because of spring break. Okay, so that's because he has this sense of data in his mind, and he predicted what is happening. So, and Lisa showed, Sarah showed and the data of national studies. And here is my own project. And when we work with teachers, and then teacher trained from our project made 3 more math gains for their children than those comparison groups. This particular one is the children who were behind the national norm at the beginning of the study. And by the end of the study, they made 5 more month gains in comparison to the comparison group. So what we want to get a takeaway message, initially I wrote something, but I thought, and what Sara brought this is probably better way there. So I forgot again. And here, and Sara quoted it, and Rick Stephen, of Senior Vice President of Human Resource and Administration at Boeing. What it says here, we need to start early, even before kindergarten, to nurture children's natural curiosity. It's a first step in creating the skilled workforce that allows the U.S. to compete globally. Okay, so I hope my example really shows this, how this message really is meaningful and evident. Thank you.
So I think there's 2 rules in presenting. One is you never want to talk right after lunch, and the other is you never want to talk right after the person who had the video of the cute kids. Unfortunately, I do not have any adorable videos of children. So Sara and Jie-Qi both talked about some specific issues related to early childhood and STEM in terms of why business should care about early childhood and thinking about STEM, and then in terms of what effective early childhood practice around STEM is. I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the early childhood policy landscape and sort of the context that that landscape provides for thinking about early childhood in STEM. And I think just a starting point, because so many of the people who are interested in STEM do tend to focus mostly on that sort of the K-12 space, is just to recognize that the early childhood policy landscape is very different in some pretty critical ways from the K-12 landscape that may be disorienting to people who are starting to look at it for the first time. So the biggest difference being that in K-12 education, we have this public commitment to universal access that is publicly funded. In early childhood, that commitment does not exist. Children's access to early childhood education programs depends on a variety of factors, including geography, their family's income, and in a lot of cases, just luck. It can be a little random. At the same time, the types of programs children are in, some of them are publicly funded, but parents also play a much larger role in funding early childhood education through private providers, as Sara mentioned, than is typically the case in K-12. The delivery system in the 2 sectors is also somewhat different. K-12 system, largely district-dominated, fairly limited parent choice in many contexts. Early childhood, very diverse provision from schools to community-based providers, for-profit, nonprofit, religious. And parent choice is really placed at a premium in this system. Parents tend to choose among a variety of options to meet their family's unique needs, in addition to the child's educational needs. Similarly, sort of the early childhood space is much less regulated than the K-12 space, although degree of regulation varies. Head Start, for example, is much more regulated than family-based childcare. And the workforce is highly varied. In K-12 education, we have wide variation, wide evidence of variation in teacher quality, but all teachers must have a bachelor's degree and state licensure or certification, whereas in the early childhood space, there's just a tremendous range in the quality from teachers with a GED or less to teachers with a master's degree. And because of that varied quality, it can be challenging to sort of do things that rely on the workforce to deliver them. Net result of all of this is that quality in the early childhood space is just much more varied than it is in K-12. There are extremely high quality early childhood programs, there are low quality programs, and then there are a lot of programs in between. Okay. I want to talk briefly about 3 critical challenges facing the early childhood world right now: access, funding, and quality. So Sara talked a bit about access in terms of the percentage of children that are served in different types of pre-K programs. It's important to recognize that use of early childhood care and education has grown dramatically in the past 50 years. The vast majority of 5-year-olds are in programs, about 2/3 of 4-year-olds are in some kind of early childhood program, and roughly 1/3 of 3-year-olds are. And that change has a large deal to do with the fact that maternal workforce participation has increased, But it also does just reflect an increased desire, even among families where the mother stays at home, recognition that early childhood education is important and desire for those programs. Despite this increase in early childhood enrollment, the U.S. still lags far behind our peers in other developed countries in terms of the extent to which we provide children with access to early childhood education. So this is a chart of OECD countries, and you see the U.S. is below the OECD average in terms of percentage of 3 to 6 year olds in early education, and that we're very close to the bottom in this ranking. In particular, low and moderate income children tend to lack access to quality early childhood education. This chart shows both the percentage of children participating in different types of publicly funded programs, state pre-K, Head Start, and any type of publicly funded program, as well as participation by income. And what you will see is that because a lot of our programs, particularly Head Start and many state pre-K programs, tend to target the poorest children, we've actually done a reasonably good job of getting, almost 2/3 of the poorest 4-year-olds into some kind of early childhood education program. But that's still not anywhere near the rate at which families that have the resources to choose any option they want do. Nearly 90% of the highest income families have their children in preschool. The other thing that you see is that you see this dip in access to early childhood education once families get above a certain income threshold where they no longer qualify for subsidized programs, but they cannot afford the private offerings. And this is particularly an area for concern because many of these children from these backgrounds do have challenges going into education that early childhood education could help address, but their families aren't able to access those services. I'm going to talk a little bit about funding now. The early childhood education industry in the U.S. is roughly a $70 billion industry, and it's an industry that's funded through a combination of both parent spending and government spending. Governments actually, when you take into account things like tax subsidies, provide the majority of early childhood funding, but parents are the biggest group funding there. And in contrast to the K-12 space where the state and local governments provide the vast majority of funding and the federal government is a small piece, the federal government actually provides more of the funding for early childhood education that state and local governments do. So it's a very different policy context in terms of the funding sources at play for a variety of reasons. The challenge is that the funding that we provide in these programs is often simply inadequate to support quality preschool. So this chart compares funding for state preschool programs, which is the lowest bar, about $4,000 per child in 2011. Head Start, about $7,600 in 2011. An estimate of what it would actually cost to provide a high-quality program based on the resources that we know support quality. And then by comparison, I have the average per pupil spending in the K-12 public education system. One of the things that is important to understand here is that very large gap between state pre-K expenditures and K-12 public school expenditures has actually grown dramatically in the past decade because we've seen substantial increases in per pupil spending in K-12 education over the past 10 years, while per pupil spending in state pre-K programs has actually gone down over time. And so the discrepancy between resources provided in early childhood and K-12 has actually increased over time. There's a couple drivers for that. One is simply that since the recession, starting in about 2007, 2008, states actually have been cutting back some of their spending on early childhood education as a result of the fiscal climate in the states. The federal government did step in and help make up some of that gap with ARA and the stimulus, which included a substantial infusion of funds for childcare as well as for Head Start. Some of those funds have gone away and some of them are still in place. We're starting to see a shift in that dynamic now. As Sara mentioned, 12 states have proposals to increase their spending on early childhood education in the coming year, including states you wouldn't typically expect, Republican governors in Michigan and Alabama promoting big expansions in preschool funding in those states in their current budgets. At the same time, though, we're seeing an increased danger because of the increasing focus on fiscal austerity at the federal level. So, there's lots of news reports about how the sequester is hitting children enrolled in Head Start. There's some effort in the CR to make up a portion of that, but not by any means all of it. And so continue to see a climate of restricted resources going forward. Now, the interesting overlay on this, of course, is the fact that President Obama in his State of the Union, did propose a significant federal investment in cooperation with states to try to expand access to universal preschool at the state level. The general take from folks who are following the politics of this on the Hill is that the congressional outlook for this is not particularly good in the current year for both partisan and fiscal reasons. But it will be interesting to see when the budget comes out what the specifics of that proposal look like in budget terms and whether there are options to move the ball incrementally in a variety of ways going forward. So coming out of this, in part because of low resources, but not exclusively because of low resources, what we see is that quality in early childhood programs is often not at the level needed to match the results we've seen in the most effective programs. The sad reality in early childhood education is that we actually know what it takes to prepare young children to succeed, but by and large, we do not do it. We actually know more about what effective practices are for the youngest children than we do about some of the strategies that would be effective in K-12. The issue is just because of the very different policy landscapes and the different funding mechanisms, we don't do what we know works in pre-K. And I think there are several reasons for that. One is simply that our expectations for children's learning remain much too low. When you look at some of the research, you know, neurons to neighborhoods, some of the work that Jie-Qi is doing, you see that children are capable of dealing with math and science concepts at a much higher level of sophistication than many adults, including professional early childhood educators in some periods, actually realize. Second issue is that we have a definition of quality in early childhood that tends to focus too heavily on inputs. Inputs are really critical in terms of you need a skilled teacher in the classroom, you need manageable class sizes, but they don't get you there. We also need to focus on actually what's happening in children's experiences in the classroom and the types of content that they're being exposed to. And then finally, we continue to struggle with confusion about the goals and the purposes of early childhood education. There's this continuing debate about whether early childhood education should primarily be about childcare for parents to work or whether it should be about education, and that infuses our politics and policy in ways that can be counterproductive. The result of all of this is that we continue to see significant early learning gaps persisting even with the pre-K programs that we have in place. Finally, I think it's important to understand that the quality of teaching is by far the most important predictor of early learning outcomes. We know that when you look at all the indicators of preschool quality lined up, the types of interactions that are going on between adults and children in the classroom predict much better than anything else how much children will learn in that classroom. And we have a fairly good knowledge base about what effective teaching in preschool looks like. Teachers display a responsive interaction style. It's not, I am the teacher, you know, teachers engage with children at their level. Teachers emphasize content that predicts school readiness. So Jie-Qi was talking about some of the research showing that specific early math skills are predictive of children's later math performance. We know that specific early literacy skills predict later reading, and effective preschool programs really need to hone in on some of that content and make sure children are having experiences in those areas. Effective teachers are planful. They are very intentional about how they structure experiences over the course of the day. That type of planning and intentionality allows you to deliver high-quality early learning experiences for children in a way that is play-based and fun, as opposed to a more inappropriately structured environment. Teachers use a balance of teaching strategies, child-centered and some teacher-directed instruction, and they use flexible grouping. So they work with children one-on-one in small groups. Those small groups change throughout the day and over the year based on sort of how children are progressing, and they work with large groups of children as well. In order to do this, effective preschool teachers actually need a fairly advanced level of knowledge and skills. They need to understand children's cognitive, language, and social emotional development. They also need a rich content and general knowledge and a strong vocabulary so that they can actually engage children in rich language instructions, so that they can be sharing content and information about the world with children, and so that they can be comfortable doing that in areas like math and science. They need some practical knowledge and instructional strategies. How do I set up an experience for children that helps them learn this? And they need to be able to work with diverse children and families, particularly in our changing demographic landscape. The challenge is that many early childhood educators have limited formal education and as a result lack the skills and knowledge to do this work. And similarly, many of our programs that prepare teachers to work in the early childhood grades do not necessarily address that full range of skills and knowledge that teachers need in order to enable them to be effective in preschool. I think this is particularly important when we're talking about STEM, because STEM is often an area where early childhood teachers particularly lack some of that core content and general knowledge. And because they themselves may have had negative experiences with math or may just not be confident in their knowledge there, they are less likely to be able to effectively support children in developing those skills. And so efforts to improve STEM in the preschool years really need to address teachers' both comfort and general knowledge in those areas. So I hope this is helpful in giving you a little bit of the context of the early childhood landscape that we're dealing with for STEM, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, with that, let's bring ourselves to our questions from the audience. I would ask that you raise your hand. We're going to bring the mic to you. Again, we are taping this, so we need the audio. And please identify yourself, and if you want to address the question to a particular individual, don't hesitate. Right back there.
Good morning. My name is Akua Kuyate. I'm with Wolf Trap Foundation for the Performing Arts. Want to thank you all for what you've shared. We also have a program that's very particular to early childhood, and our project is the early childhood STEM learning through the arts. It's been in now about 5-6 years, and we're certainly dealing with math, science, and engineering in terms of looking at the arts as concrete, experiential ways of engaging children in STEM learning. And understanding what you all are saying about active learning being
That's
a really
funded by Northrop Grumman, right?
Yes, Northrop Grumman is one of our funders who supported it, along with we are in part of research with U.S. Department of Education right now. So the part that I'm asking you all is the information you provide in terms of your research as well as your data, both from the funding side as well as the research side, is really important as we're sharing information with all of our constituencies, our funders, our communities. Is that information available to share with everyone? In terms, I'm looking at this data, I'm saying, wow, this is important. We want to be able to share that, as we also intend to share our information in terms of our own research with respect to early childhood STEM learning and that active role that arts play in that process.
I'll start, and then I'm sure others will jump in, but we would love to have you share our materials. We think that the brief that we developed is especially good if you're approaching maybe a corporate sponsor about why they should invest in this, and to give them some comfort that they aren't the only companies doing this. So we give out copies of that for free, and we'd be happy to have you share it as well. Obviously, I'm happy to share any of our slides that are helpful to you.
We have a website which includes tons of both child data and how children really understand or misunderstand some mathematics concept, as well as a teacher. And someone said this is a wonderful teacher. We have a number of videotapes in our website, which is early math, one word, .erikson.edu. Erikson spells ERIKSON. So earlymath.erikson.edu.
I'm happy to share anything that's helpful. All the data I use comes from public sources, and so it's easy to find. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lachelle Hatley, and I too enjoyed all the presentations. I'm the executive director of Uplift Inc. here in DC, and we provide STEM education for age 4 through age 19. We also develop learning technology, and so I'm wondering if any of the presenters can speak to some of the data that deals with mobile technology or any tangible device in terms of this population in STEM education. Maybe something from Sesame Street, something from PBS. How is that particular media, or transmedia as they call it, sometimes. How does that impact this particular population in STEM education?
Well, no, let's stick to the panel.
So I am not an expert on this. I would really suggest that you, a woman named Lisa Guernsey at the New America Foundation, where I used to work, is a tremendous expert on that topic. Guernsey, like the cow or the island in England.
And the other source, same with Sarah, I'm not an expert on this, but Michael Levine, who's head of the Joan Kuntz Center at Sesame Workshop, is also, this is what they do all the time. So that's another good source for you.
Again, let me give you an example of what we're doing. And I think working with early childhood, one very important thing is, as Sarah pointed out, is developmentally appropriate. So, and we want them to really use their hands to experience things. So, and some of the medias, and it's really just touch screen, so that can be challenging. And what we're doing now, currently working with Illinois Institute of Technology, their graduate students and students help us to think about, and we bring the early child development knowledge to them. They bring the STEM and the knowledge to us. Let me give you an example, then you understand how that technology can be used. And I don't know if you all know the children's book, Three Little Pigs. You all know that. Read Three Little Pigs and sent by mom to go out to build their house. Of course, and two pigs didn't build a good house and get blown by the wolf. Okay, so that's a scenario for children to think about how you are going to build a house. You are the consultant for pigs. Now you need to build a house for the pigs, but there's materials, only kind of a material. So it really helps children understand the material, the strengths, the shapes, all kind of things, STEM's involved. Then what technology is get involved here is the IIT students build some kind of a wolf, blow the wing, okay? Because kids will say, my house is get blown down because your wing is too big if you blow yourself. So we have a computer to show that the wing, the force is exactly same to Sarah's and to mine and to the Sarah, but my house got burned or got turned on. So that is a computer kids really see, and it's exactly the same speed, the same force. And that's one way we're using technology for helping children to understand.
Can I add one caution, which is that I've seen a number of studies that show that technology is not the best learning tool for very young children under the age of 3. The Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences at the University of Washington did a study showing how infants learn language, and what they found is that very young infants are learning language starting literally a few hours after birth, but they learn from human interaction. If a human is interacting with them, they're learning language, in their infancy. But if the same human is on a television screen talking to them, they do not learn language. So as much as, I know we see 3- and 4-year-olds using computers and iPhones and that kind of stuff, I think we need to be a little cautious, especially for the younger children, that it's the human interaction that really teaches them.
The other thing, I think, in terms of technology in early childhood is that we tend to want to go right to the child application because it's the sexiest and the most interesting, but I think there's really powerful work going on around how technology can help address some of the gaps in the skills of the early childhood workforce. So I think almost all the really powerful, innovative professional development strategies that I know of that are working with early childhood educators use some kind of technology component to deliver at a sort of more sustainable price point some of those services.
So that leads to a question. Let me take prerogative as the host here and say that it's quite persuasive from the presentations this morning to hear about the impact and value of early childhood education, but that word quality is still looming above us. So I'm wondering if our 3 presenters can address that head on. It's one thing to say we know that some things are of quality and some things are not, and what is it that we can do? And I guess I can't help but resist, how might STEM help on the quality issue, if at all? I'll start with Sarah, because she's next to me.
Oh, great.
Miss Sarah.
So, I mean, I think the quality conversation is so many layers. We could talk about this for 3 days, but one of the issues is just that we have very little information now, and the kind of information that we have is not particularly good about the quality of the broad range of providers, particularly when you get outside the publicly funded space, and it's a very difficult marketplace for example, for parents to negotiate. And I think some things like quality resource and improvement systems are trying to sort of address some of those issues, but don't necessarily always get at the heart of what's actually happening in the classroom in terms of child's intensity of experiences. When we sort of step beyond that sort of big picture systemic piece, I think we ultimately have to realize that there are basically two approaches that you can use to improve quality. One is to sort of work with existing providers to help them boost their quality. And the second is to actually build the supply of quality providers by sort of creating new providers, growing existing quality providers, and replicating. And ultimately, we've tended to focus on the first strategy, but ultimately if we want to get all children in high quality programs, we need both, and we need to have much better strategies for how we can help improve the quality of existing providers. We have some really strong models. You know, Texas School Ready is a model that shows some positive effects. My Teaching Partner is a model that shows some positive effects, but I'm not sure they get us all the way there, and they don't really particularly focus on STEM either. So that's sort of a gap in the space that we need to do a better job of.
I would say, teacher training, and the teacher training. Our teachers, particularly early childhood teachers, are STEM phobic. Many of teachers told me that first that they came to early childhood field because they don't have to teach math. Okay, or math is simply counting. Okay, my kids can count 100. It doesn't mean anything. Okay, it doesn't mean much, I should say. Or we can name the shape. We know this is the triangle, this is a square, but they don't even know a square and a rectangle is basically the same thing, because if you talk about the attributes, it's the same thing. So first is teacher training. We have to help teachers to understand what is early math. Early math or early STEM is not just sit there, teach them 1 + 1 = 2. Mathematics, or we use mathematizing the environment. And the life is full of math, as long as you, teacher, adults, understand what that math is. Okay. In terms of training, it is not just give teacher a cookbook do how to. It is help teacher to understand what are those big ideas in the early STEM education. Once teacher is armed with those big ideas, and they are much more flexible in their planning, in their teaching, and in their helping children deal with different kind of situations.
I'll just add a quick resource on quality is the National Institute for Early Education Research, which publishes an annual yearbook of state pre-K policies. It's only about publicly funded, state-funded pre-K, so it's a limited version of the world, but it does have a 10-point quality checklist and rates all of the states, so it's someplace to start if you're looking for a definition of quality.
And how are states responding to that checklist?
It's really wonderful. I'm so glad you asked that, because what gets measured gets done. They produce this report every year, and every year I've worked with them for a very long time. Governors will call up and say, we're going to increase next year, or they make a big deal about the fact that they've scored, now 7 out of 10 instead of 3 out of 10. Or they say, hold the release of the yearbook because we're about to, add one more notch to our belt. So it really makes a difference when you shine a spotlight on what people are doing. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the website is NIEER.org, National Institute for Early Education Research. And if you look at the 2 slides on the handouts that I gave you that show like the pre-K map, it came from that organization, so it's written down there.
Good morning, and thank you so very much. It really is inspiring and helpful to get the context, the frame, the scope of research, and the inspiring practice. I'm here not only because of my own interests long term, but I brought resources of the Ready to Learn project that's funded by the U.S. Department of Ed, and it seeks to leverage the power of public media in math and literacy skills. The executive director, I have his card here. I also brought, and I went back and there are not.
Ronnie, pose a question.
Yeah. Well, the question would be, how can we further coordinate the innovative work, such as with Ready to Learn, and they're developing mobile apps for parents, and anywhere, anytime, and they're doing some extraordinary research. And how might we help the states understand and the policymakers the extraordinary research and resources?
I think this addresses your question, but one thing I have been struck by is the number of parenting materials that are directed at parents that are very complicated and hard, and make a list of 42 things you should all be doing with your child, which is really hard, even for those of us who only have one job, as opposed to people who are working 2 and 3 jobs. But I've seen some kind of glimmers of hope of organizations that are developing much simpler parenting materials, and also giving people ideas about how to use everyday interactions with your child, going to the grocery store, et cetera, as a way to teach them. And there's been a big emphasis on reading to your child. Read to your child, read the street signs to your child, read the grocery labels to your child. And if we could do the same with math, do I have more apples or more oranges or whatever? Jackie will be much better than I am at that. But I think that would be a wonderful way to help parents think they don't have to take more time necessarily, and they can make good use of the time they do have with their child.
So I'll tell one quick personal anecdote. When my younger daughter was 3 years old, I took both of my daughters to the East Wing. I took them all the time, but one day in particular, we were talking about the Calder mobile, and I was doing a little math, doing a little categorizing, a little bit of physics, and my 3-year-old puts her hands on her hips and says, "The trouble with you, Mommy, is you think math is everywhere." So
That's good.
I stood corrected.
Mathematics.
Janice.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I have a question, and then I'm just want to mention I'm Janice Earle from the National Science Foundation, where we also have some resources that people might be interested in potentially, particularly in terms of researching early learning and cognition. And we a nice set of resources from our informal science education programs too. Television shows, Peep in the Big Wide World, Kids in Museums, stuff like that. So folks might want to know that. But I actually do have a question, and it has to do with the transition issue. One of the things, as we've been looking at the NSF portfolio in early learning, it seems to us that there's a huge disconnect between the 3 and 4-year-old space and the K space, and that it kind of doesn't connect up very well. And I was wondering if any of you are aware of some pathways or some progress that's being made to integrate a little more closely what happens in pre-K with K and on.
So, sort of this issue of pre-K third alignment, because early childhood is the period through age 8 or 3rd grade, it has become a really hot topic sort of in the last several years. The Foundation for Child Development has done a bunch of work on this. The New America Foundation has done a fair amount of work at a policy level. There are also some really interesting initiatives on the ground focusing on sort of pre-K third alignment. So, sort of Bremerton, Washington is a good example of a school district that had actively tried to do pre-K third alignment, not just within programs that operated itself, but actually going out to the community to sort of build networks with the community-based providers to align some children's experiences. Montgomery County, right outside DC, has done some very good work to align its sort of pre-K third programs. Places like Union City and Elizabeth, New Jersey. The Erikson Institute, where Jackie works, actually has an organization within it called the New Schools Project that does very explicit professional development in Chicago elementary schools to create an aligned pre-K third experience. Now, a lot of these activities, because of the wide attention to the research on literacy by 3rd grade, have tended to prioritize the literacy component of it. I almost feel like the STEM world or the early childhood world, or one of us needs to come up with like what's the STEM equivalent of literacy by third grade to sort of be a rallying point for people around like what's the thing, because I think part of the challenge is it's too nebulous, so people don't get it as much. But so there is a tremendous amount of work in that space, both engaging outside community-based providers, but also trying to work. Pre-K is often this neglected part of the elementary school where the principal doesn't even go in the classroom because he has no idea what they're doing. And similarly, kindergarten is a weak spot in a lot of schools too that can benefit from that attention.
I think can be answered in a number of ways. And the first, I think I echo what Sarah said, that there's a pre-K to third movement in the nation, and because of earlier study about the literacy development. And if children do not reach at this grade level by third grade, you are really very hard for you to catch up. And we don't know anything about STEM yet, whether third grade is a really critical age grade. However, developmentally, from child development knowledge, we know, and there's a really significant shift, we call it, and 7-year shift, and age 7 is a really developmental shift, and from more concrete learner to more abstract thinking. So that's why, and we put a pre-K to third grade. But structure-wise, I want to point two things. One is that if the pre-K and the K in the same building, that's certainly, pre-K and all other elementary grades in the same building is much easier. If, and we know lots of pre-K is only a very small portion of our children to attend. And lots of children in the child care center, that's just really for early childhood, and there's no connection to elementary. So it is much harder to provide training in that grade. At the moment, what we are providing, early mass collaborative provide training is from pre-K to third grade in Chicago public schools. But if we're moving to the city and it's just early child care, and we can only train child care, and teachers don't have any connections. But training can provide, but there's structure issue here because I came from China and I'm still working with China on a yearly basis. And the system there is different, and there's something that doesn't cost much. It really makes huge difference, which is that in China, every teacher teaches at least 3 years. Okay, from 3-year-old to 6-year-old, there's one teacher. You teach from 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, so you know the whole system. And the elementary from first grade to sixth grade, teachers first grade to third grade, and fourth grade to sixth grade. And the middle school, teacher always teach from 8th grade to 9th grade, then 7th grade to 9th grade, then high school from 10th grade to 12th grade. Teacher would know from beginning to that period. You don't have to assess a child every year, every quarter, because you follow child for 3 years. You know where the child is. I think that is a system problem in our system. And we train 120 teachers now in our project from pre-K to third. Always we have to tell them how pre-K work help third grade. What third grade is built on the pre-K. But teacher only teach one grade, and those bad teachers always demoted to pre-K. Okay, good teacher promoted to pre-K to third grade, and then they stay there and they don't move. They don't want to move. That's the problem our system.
No, that's good. That was a passionate note. I think we have time for one more question in the back. If you can get the mic, please.
I'll do this. Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. I have one comment and 2 short questions. You mentioned the process that they do in China. Is that looping for the teacher follows the child? Are you referring to the teacher follows the child for several years?
Yes.
Yeah, we call that looping.
Yes,
I like
we
that
call
process.
looping here. Yeah.
But my question, Sara Mean, to you. You mentioned in your presentation the definition of early childhood. Now, were you meaning NACE's definition or?
So early childhood is a period from
Or
0 to 8.
Right.
Yeah.
So really you were referring to
Yeah.
NACE's definition. Okay. And then the other question I have is to you, Dr. Rosen. What will be the next steps with the early childhood STEM learning and education?
Well, our purpose in the salons is to bring topics of interest to a whole range of constituents. We certainly bring to our corporate members' attention high-quality STEM programs that meet what we call our design principles and things of that nature. But this is intended as a forum to exchange ideas and move forward from there. Thank you all very much. We really appreciate your joining us, and we will see you at a future salon.
You guys